This is Saturday, February 13th, 2010. We're in Cheri Gaulke's studio in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, California. Sue Maberry on camera.
The nun image, really, Nancy Angelo gets credit for that. She had a performance persona called Sister Angelica Furiosa, and she had done video work and performance work in that character. But she had this vision, a nighttime dream or a vision once of this series of nuns in multicolored habits on a hillside. It was in a Renaissance time period. And she just thought it was a beautiful image, but it sort of was a metaphor for her on joining an order, on being part of a feminist community. And so she and I had done a performance in 1979, I believe, called The Passion, where in that performance we gave birth to, she was performing as Sister Angelica Furiosa, I was performing as a priest and as Christ, and we gave birth to these multicolored nuns.
I think it was Cheri that was inspired by this Time magazine cover, and also we were hearing on the news of these massive protests in Europe about, at that time, the USSR and the USA, the Cold War was heating up, and there was a lot of talk about a possible war, like literally nuclear missile war, on European soil.
So we felt like we heard the cry. I mean, we heard that people in Europe were saying, we don't want to be the next battlefield for a war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Our whole project was designed to be a dialogue between artists and activists and everyday people in both North America and Western Europe.
Excellent point. That also, I think our training at the Women's Building also had a focus of looking at strategies for being effective, which included art, so finding whatever that intuitive thing is that we wanted to do, as well as how does it resonate with other communities, with other activists, and how can we pair up and be more effective in that fashion.
Yeah, and I think that what arose out of the protests of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and feminism is this sort of power to the people kind of
Definitely.
Sensibility that that we have to, that you can't just let governments talk to each other, that the human beings, regular folks need to talk to each other. So I think that's a really important point, that this dialogue, that we saw our art as a vehicle for creating that dialogue.
We didn't necessarily just keep our work in the art world. One of the interesting things about how we performed was wherever we could find venues, including in the streets, at public monuments. We did some work in galleries, but it really was more like a grassroots type of organizing.
Women's centers, those who were interested in activism against the war.
Right, and it really grew from the contacts that we had and people that put us in touch with other groups. It really grew organically.
Yeah, it's astounding to think of the kind of networking we did before the internet. I mean, that we actually, wrote to all these people in all these different countries and managed to, connect with women's coffee houses and stuff. It just blows my mind when I look at the vast network of people that we worked with. We created a project called End of the Rainbow, which of course is a double entendre. Peace being something one might want to achieve at the end of the rainbow. But also that nuclear war represented the end of all things beautiful, everything that we cherish and feel is lovely. So from our training at the Feminist Studio Workshop, working with Suzanne Lacey, that we created a structure, a three-part conceptual structure to sort of contain what we wanted to do. Part one took place in the U.S., involved a number of performances, collaborating with activists, and gathering artworks from artists in North America, because we recognized that other people were doing anti-nuclear work, so we wanted to take that work to Europe and share it with Europeans. Part two of End of the Rainbow was going on this Western European tour, traveling to different countries, doing performances, which we can describe in a minute better, but these public actions that we did, but also doing slideshows, presentations of the artwork that we'd collected. And then part three, and then while we were in Europe, also collecting artwork from the Europeans. And then part 3 was the final sort of exhibition of everything that we had gathered. So we did an exhibition that had 300 artworks that had been collected from North American and Western European artists about the nuclear threat. So that was the sort of 3-part conceptual framework. Then within that, many different things happened. So part 1,
Let's start in.
shovel defense, maybe?
Shovel
One of our
defense.
big
Yeah.
Part
things
one,
we did
shovel
was
defense.
shovel defense.
Okay, so for shovel defense, we collaborated with Marguerite Elliott, who created the shovel graveyard that we displayed in public settings. And the piece, Shovel Defense, was inspired by Paul Conrad's cartoon in the LA Times that was in response to the Undersecretary of Defense of the United States saying publicly that all Americans need to survive a nuclear attack are enough shovels to go around so that we can each dig a 6-foot hole to get into and we'd be safe. And Paul Conrad turned it into a shovel graveyard, implying that we would be digging our own graves. So the sisters installed this shovel graveyard that Marguerite designed and built in front of LA City Hall with a banner that we made saying, "Civil Defense, a grave mistake." And then we performed in our rainbow-colored habits a series of movements designed to be photographed from any angle to get our message to the media.
Yeah, so this particular performance, because we did many different kinds of performance actions, was literally staged for the media.
Right.
And was successful. It went out, those images were picked up by the UPI wire service and went out to over 150 newspapers and news stations across the United
Nationally.
States. So we really were successful in getting that message out, which was that one captured image of a nun with the shovel graveyard and that great banner saying "Civil Defense, a grave mistake." It was
Right.
good. Suzanne and Leslie taught us well.
That's right.
Part 2, European tour.
Well, the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp or Peace Encampment was sort of famous in activist circles because these women were camping on a missile base and they were, ironically, I guess...
It wasn't just camping,
Yeah,
they were camping in protest.
and protesting. And they staged a demonstration where hundreds of people formed a circle around the base, and they got a lot of media coverage. But, I mean, we really saw them as warriors for peace because they were living in just horrible conditions but refusing to leave because they really wanted to draw attention to all these cruise missiles that were buried there or mounted there, aimed at the Soviet Union.
And it was U.S. missiles and British missiles.
Right,
They were
yeah,
in cahoots. And they ended up being there for 9 years. So it was this incredible commitment. These various women that would come in and be at this encampment in London weather that was rainy and chilly and
Yeah, it was really
Wet.
miserable.
and that was how it was the day that we went initially.
Yeah.
It was
And-
we drove through all
yeah.
this rain and chill and
Yeah, it was powerful. I remember we stopped at Stonehenge on the way, and I remember seeing tanks, American tanks, pulling out of the parking lot, and we also stopped at Avebury, which is an ancient stone circle, and we were really struck by the irony of that our foremothers had planted these standing stones in these beautiful locations to chart the sun and the stars and the movement of the heavens, and now American generals were planting missiles in that same earth, and it felt like this incredible violation. It was very spiritual for us in many ways. So we went to Greenham Common. We arrived there. It was drizzly. It was wet. It was cold. It was miserable. They were all drenched and like a bunch of drowned rats, sort of. But they were so happy to see us.
and the sun broke through.
Part of part 1, when we were networking with activist groups in Los Angeles, we collected messages from these different groups. What would they like to say to the people of Europe or the world? What are their messages of peace, or what were their messages about the nuclear threat? And then we translated them into symbol flags, kind of like we were trying to go beyond the barriers of language and make a
International language.
An
literally.
international language of symbols, and we drew them on a series of flags, like our semaphore flags that we use to SOS.
Yes.
But these were flags that were simple squares, white squares, and we strung them sequentially to display the message. And so when we did our first display of these flags at Greenham Common, we hung them up on the chain link fence, and then we used them as a discussion tool to talk to the women there about what were people's messages that we were bringing, and then we got a message from them. And we did that at every place that we traveled. We displayed the messages that we had collected so far, and then we asked that group where we were, what is your message that you would like us to take on to the next place? And
So the messages kept growing. And I also brought messages from New York Artists for Survival, Dancers for Survival, and from political art distribution and documentation. And so, yeah, we kept collecting from every place we went.
And as we traveled, we had to, at night, I remember, figure out how to translate that group's message into a symbol, and then we drew them on these flags with markers.
And so then as we traveled around Europe, like after Greenham Common, we went to Holland, and we went to Amsterdam, and there was a big war memorial there called the Dam. We draped our flags on that. We would always do a sort of stylized performance where we would process in, and we would do the SOS, SOS for our world, and then we would drape the flags, and then we would just hang out and talk to people. We also did it in a town called Nijmegen, Holland, and it was in a place called Plain 44, which essentially means the square numbered 44, but the 44 referred to the year in which that area was destroyed by bombs in World War II, and it had been rebuilt as a shopping area. And so we staged our performance there, and it was very active. I mean, there were a lot of people passing by, and it was very moving because people came up to us and they had lost family members in the war. It was still a very strong memory for them. And so there was that stylized part of the performance, and then there was hanging out with people and just interacting, just being present with them, and being back on that idea of being these sort of ambassadors.
Yeah, and that
for
was one
people.
That was one of the most dramatic parts of the performance for me. That everyone I interacted with, and I think for all of us, had someone in their recent memory that had been killed during World War II. And they were really there was almost this sense of desperation, like, oh my God, are we really going to have war on the soil again? And they were thrilled that there were actually like we were able to be a voice saying, we don't happen to,
right.
We don't agree with our government. There are lots of people that actually don't agree with our government, and then we'd share. So along with that public action, we also had these slide presentations in either in alternative art centers or in women's coffee shops, and I think it was an alternative art center in Nijmegen.
Yes.
That we were at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, as we traveled too, I think we recognized that our international language didn't always clearly communicate that there, and so we began to also produce a flyer that we would add to as we traveled, where we would translate it into the language of the country we were in, because it was very important to us that we were not misunderstood, that our message was clear. Mm-hmm. So then after Holland, or the Netherlands, we went to Berlin, where we participated in a very large peace arts festival, Künstler für den Frieden, Art for Peace. And that was on the 50th anniversary of the fall of Hitler.
Yeah.
And we did a presentation
Hitler's
there.
rise to power.
And then from there we went to Malta, where Anne and I had performed in 78 in the prehistoric temples and in a church in Malta. And so we had some good connections there, and it was wonderful because we ended up being sponsored by the government of Malta, the
Ministry of Culture.
Ministry of Culture. And they housed us, and we performed in different settings and lectured in different settings. They were converting all these former military facilities into cultural facilities. And we met a rock band that one of those vaulted spaces where they stored weapons, ammunition, that was the rock band's place where
Rehearsal
they
space.
rehearsal space. We did a bunch of photo series in the various temples as well, the prehistoric temples, and those were beautiful photos. And then after Malta, we returned to London, where we had gone to see the Greenham Common, but we now presented in London in Covent Garden our final public action where we had the flags. And at this point, we had a really spectacular array of messages from U.S. and European people. So we had a really full display in Covent Garden, and that was really great.
And there's lots of people in Covent Garden, so we're busy all day having more conversations.
So,
And then we returned, so that part 3 was exhibition and sharing everything. So all the works that we had collected from both U.S. and Western European artists. The first exhibition was at Spark, Social and Public Art Resource Center. But that exhibition then came to New York, where I mounted it in Franklin Furnace, and then traveled to Canada.
And
as
it
well.
included documentation of all 3 parts of Into the Rainbow also.
Right, along with all the artist works, documentation.
it's ironic that we did this work so many years ago, but in many ways we're facing these same issues today. That nuclear proliferation is still threatening our world.
Still clouding our future.
Exactly.